If you've reached this lesson, then congratulations. You now know the fundamentals of the JavaScript programming language. But it isn't the whole story. While JavaScript can be used server-side in operating systems and PDFs, most developers will encounter it in a web browser. Now, web browsers allow you to do cool stuff such as sending messages, animating graphics, and managing videos. But to do that in JavaScript, you need to delve into the APIs. Now, API stands for Application Programming Interface. It has one major task: to enable software components to communicate with each other. Now, in simple terms, a web browser provides a number of software libraries and objects which allow you to control a web page. Now, that typically could be adding, changing, or removing page elements, moving, resizing, or transforming elements. And if this is done incrementally over time, you can create animated sequences. It can also be used for manipulating forms and user input. And this is one of the most frequent uses of JavaScript. That is to validate forms before they're submitted to a server. You can also make server requests within the page. Now, you might have heard of the term AJAX. And this is a technique which allows a page to fetch more information from the server and displaying it without doing a full refresh. You can also use APIs to store data locally. This could include cookies and some of the newer HTML5 data stores. And of course, talking of HTML5, we have some of the newer APIs such as audio, video, canvas, geolocation, and file handling. So let's look at the good parts. First, many of the APIs have been around for several years and are consistent in most browsers. If you're doing something such as manipulating the document content, most of the API calls you'll make will work everywhere, and that includes really old browsers such as IE6. Next, the documentation is generally very good, and all the main vendors adhere to W3C standards. Now, the W3C is the World Wide Web Consortium, and that's the organisation responsible for determining what browser features become a standard for others to follow. Now, while there can be early implementation differences, over time these are ironed out so all browsers reach the same level. Now finally, JavaScript is an amazing language which allows us to simulate support for an API even when the browser doesn't support that specific technology. Now there are several good examples where this is useful. Internet Explorer 8 and below don't support HTML5, so it doesn't understand what to do with an article tag. You can't style it or manipulate it. However, there's a shim written in JavaScript which creates all the new HTML5 elements in memory. Now this has the effect of enabling support in IE8 and below. Similarly, you might find that a certain browser doesn't support the local storage API. Now you can create a library which makes it appear as if it is supported. But rather than saving data to a browser database, you place it in a cookie or use an AJAX call to place it on the server. But of course, it's not all good news. Browsers are complex pieces of software written by different vendors with different priorities and different release schedules. Now, understandably, an individual browser won't support the same set of APIs to the same level as all others. Now, you should realise that the W3C does not actually dictate web standards. It's the vendor's responsibility to invent a new feature and seek approval from others. Ultimately, newer APIs can change radically, and APIs may even be dropped if something better comes along. Now finally, we have Internet Explorer. Now the browser gets a lot of bad press, but Microsoft are now doing a good job, and IE9 is as good as the competition in many respects. Unfortunately, many people have stuck with IE8. Possibly because they're running Windows XP, which doesn't support IE9. And there are still a few people out there with IE6 and IE7. Now, IE8 and below will never support many of the new HTML5 APIs. Now, you can code around these problems, but it can make development far more difficult and frustrating than it need be. That said, it's not all bad. Just remember to test early and test often. Don't leave your IE testing to the very end of the project. Finally, you will hear many developers complain about JavaScript. Now, no development language is ever perfect, but JavaScript attracts particularly scathing comments. But if you delve further, you'll usually discover the person is complaining about one or more browser APIs. Now, while the browser APIs are called from JavaScript, they're just libraries and not part of the language itself. The developers are really complaining about the hostile environment where JavaScript is being used. To apply a metaphor, it's a little like saying Ferraris are awful cars because they don't drive on water. So just remember that JavaScript and the browser APIs are separate entities, but they are mixed within your coding, and that can lead to development complications.